welcome to a podcast by Insider View. Uh, Today's topic is on a newly launched book in Goa, and with us here is the author of this book, which is called Goan Divinities in Metal, a study of bronzes of Goa. So here we have with us Dr. Rohit Phalgaonkar. Rohit, welcome to this podcast. And it is such a pleasure to have you and introduce you to our viewers. So, Dr. Rohit Phalgaonkar is a name which is associated in Goa with um, Goan history, research on Goa's past, and a brilliant academician. Before we actually get on to asking Rohit the questions about this beautiful book which he has just recently got out, I would like to say a few words about him. Dr. Rohit Phalgaonkar his family hails from a village called Poingin in the Kankon taluka of Goa, the southernmost taluka of Goa. And this is a taluka which is steeped in tradition. And as Rohit has often shared, that the elders of his family always spoke to him about the culture that they were born in, that their village was so much known for and is still known for. It's a cultural hotspot. And this is what actually brought about in him as a young child the interest in Goa's culture and Goa's past. His career took him into teaching, and with that, I think what he has been able to achieve is not just pass on his knowledge to the younger generation, but along with his knowledge, his the intense interest and enthusiasm that he passes on. And I think we have to thank him for that. His research has made Goa really proud because his research has taken him to various national and international platforms, and his contributions to some very esteemed journals and some academic fora. So Rohit, let's get on without much ado. We get on to this book that I'm sure people are really, really excited about knowing. So this is a book that has been very recently brought out, published by the Department of Art and Culture, the government of Goa. We had a brilliant book release function where the minister, Mr. Govind Gowde himself, released this book, and we had some very stimulating exchanges on this topic from highly acclaimed academicians in this field, in the field of Indology, in the field of history. And so today let's get on to asking Rohit what exactly went into the making of this book. So Rohit, the first question I'm sure everybody will ask you is, what made you get into the research on the bronzes of Goa?
Okay, the first thing when I was studying, basically when I was doing a research, I always found Goa lagging behind with respect to the ancient period. And what triggered me, basically, when you're asking me bronzes, what triggered me is a publication of 1965 of the Goa government.
Okay.
And that is when Goa had just been liberated.
Yes.
1961 we got liberation.
Yes.
And Goa Historical Archives, it was called that time. That publication was called as Ancient Shrines of Goa.
Okay.
Wherein Dr. V.T. Gune, and I would really want to take this opportunity to pay a tribute to him, and which I have done it on the previous occasions also, wherever I get a time or get an occasion to do it. Because this man was the first director of archaeology and archives at that time. Yeah. He went on exploring ancient Goa. Of course, the Portuguese part of Goa was there. There were records, there were papers, documents speaking about it. But what was there before the Portuguese was not yet highlighted.
Yes.
And this director came up with the compilation saying that it's the ancient shrines of Goa, and there he makes an attempt to publish 4 sculptures of bronze, which are found in the village of Narve, where and the temple was rebuilt by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Okay. It was a temple of Saptakoteshwar. So there in that temple he finds 4 bronzes, and he lists them on, and he puts up small miniatures, pictures on his book. That triggered me. What happened is we were studying, when we study art history, The Chola bronzes are famous in
Yes,
South
yes.
India. Then you come to the west coast of India, you have Gujarat famous for bronzes.
Okay.
Then you still go on top, you have Rajasthan bronzes which are very famous. They are made from the Jodhpuri mitti.
Okay.
Then you have the central India famous for Bastar bronzes, where the
Mm.
Bastar tribes
Yes,
are casting
casting
bronzes.
the bronze. Yes.
Come to East India, you have Bengal famous for Pala bronzes.
Okay.
Okay, and Dokra art. Now all this is casting art. Then you have Kashmir, which is, was always attacked, and it was always foreigners' invasions were there. There also you find Kashmir bronzes.
Oh.
So I always had this question mark in my mind: why Goa doesn't have any such remains?
Oh.
So to that I was told, no, we were attacked by the Portuguese, or they were destroyed probably, or whatever. So, but that was not an satisfying answer for me,
Yeah.
because Portuguese limited their rule for three talukas, that is Tiswadi, Salsad, and Bardes.
Yes.
What about the bigger Goa?
Yes.
Pedne taluka came in towards the 18th century. So what about those talukas? Why there is a dearth? Were there not still explored, or were there still there was a need for looking out? And that opened my lens, I would say. And the first thing what I came across while documenting is I happened to go to this temple of Shankwadeshwari, which is in Vailing, and I went there casually. So there was a discussion saying that no, we have a sculpture and you can come and document it, because I was studying iconography for my PhD. So to my astonishment, I saw something very unique, where there's a huge anthill, and behind the anthill there is in front of the anthill there is a sculpture of Mahishasuramarddini. And I just gazed at it because it was very sparkling, like gold. Okay, very unique. The features were unique, and I felt that this is not something new. It is not recent, but something exceptional. And that was the first time I remember. It was in 2011. I clicked pictures of it, and I thanked the temple committee for allowing me to do so. And I asked the temple committee, I said, "How old is this?" It says, "Old. This has been there since inception of the temple. We were based, actually, it was based in Sakwad earlier, and then the temple was shifted during the Inquisition, and it is there with us." I said, if I can find, Viti Gune, Dr. Viti Gune, talking about Narve, three of them, four of them, this is the fifth one. Then if I still dig into it, I'll still find more. And I'll share you a small anecdote where, there is one person whom I met, and I said, I want to document, I want to photograph the sculpture of Kamakshi, in Shiroda, because that's also a unique worship, because you find Kamakshi in Bangalore, in South India, Bangalore and Tamil Nadu, there are temples, and you have Kamakhya. So we have one in Goa, so we need to highlight it. So the committee, the person who I met said, we have a murti. Means they call it a murti. In technical terms, we call it a sculpture. So we have a murti. I said the murti must be of stone. He says no. Says then of what metal it is? What material it is? Wood? No, 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 no. That murti is of metal. Dhatuchi thi. So these were the words he used, and it's still ringing in my ears. So I said, my ears, again stood up. I said, oh, are you talking the truth? Have you seen it? Yeah, I've seen. We go there often. I've seen the Abhishek being performed. And when I heard that, I said, then it is an Abhishek Murti. It is not the main Murti, not the main sculpture. So I said, no, that is the main one, and we have been worshipping it. And this is how my, what would I say, my car or my cameras and my brain started rolling.
So this is, I think, something that takes you back to more than 10 years.
Yes, it was in 2011.
So this is what you see is the labor of love of over a decade. And I think we have to really, really be proud and happy that this has come out. So having gone through this myself, what I find is that it has been very methodically arranged, so the researcher, the academic in Rohit has brought it out in a very methodical way, where he actually starts by his contents actually go back to the methodology that he has used, the dating process, and the various features of this entire process. And then he goes on to the other icons in different medium that is available in Goa and is seen in through the cultural practices. And then he speaks about the actual casting, so the technical aspect of this art form. So he talks about the guilds that existed. He talks about the communities that were involved, not just as artisans, but practitioners of the faith. And so how the community itself, it was like one unit. And then he goes on to actually listing out all the bronzes that he has found. Bronze happens to be a generic name.
Yes.
It's the term that is used generally that when one speaks about this art form. And then, of course, he's done a beautiful listing again, which makes it easy for you to understand. So you have female deities, you have male deities, you have couple deities. And then, with this very exhaustive, which I would say exhaustive for this book, he ends his listing by showing specifically where they belong presently, to which temple they belong presently. So having gone through this entire book, I would like to hear from you what actually has gone into the making, and how could you, I think for a common person, what is of utmost interest is how do you date something?
Yeah.
And that is something very exciting in this book. So can you just throw some light on that?
This is a very interesting question you have asked, because in history, dating is very important. When there is no date, it is like, you're telling a folklore. So when it comes to Goa, we are unfortunate that there are very few evidences which prove a period.
Yeah.
Because most of the inscriptions, or when we date something, it is based on inscriptions. So we have very few inscriptions as compared to the other states. When you go to Karnataka, Maharashtra, other states, you'll find a temple, or you'll find a fort or whatever, and you'll find a date put on it. Okay, there'll be a few lines of inscription of the establishment of that temple or whatever. But here it is absent. Neither you don't find the temples dated even in the old conquest, that is Tiswadi Salzan days, and nor you find temples dated in the new conquest. There are very few examples, rare examples. So in such a scenario, what is done is, technically you have something called as a stylistic analysis, wherein you have a sculpture, and that sculpture is looked, the features are studied, and you see similar sculptures elsewhere. Maybe along the coast or along that, supposing you have the Vijayanagar period. So you study the sculptures which were part of the Vijayanagar sculptural art. And then if you find semblances, that is how you assign a date to this non-dated sculpture. Now, for example, I'll give you that the Vijayanagar kings, they were wearing crowns, and they were typical conical style crowns. They were called a kullai, and many people, the travelers have mentioned them in their travelogues. So they were basically an influence of Persian, Indo-Persian art. And even the crown basically is an Indian concept. Kirita Mukut it is called. So that was styled like that kullai. And in the absence of a crown, they would just wear that kullai. So crown was for royal darbars and whatever. So those crowns match with the crowns which are found in the bronzes of Goa. So you have bronzes like of Shanta Durga, Shankwaleshwari, Kamakshi. You have bronze of Narsimha, which have those styled of crowns. So based on that, you can actually date them to the Vijayanagar period. So maybe those guilds, those artisans might have been influenced by those styles of art, because it was that they reigned that period, and we have a lot of Vijayanagar Goa connection, which is unexplored today, and that was because of the port. So you have, there is a treaty which was signed between the Vijayanagar king and the Portuguese. It went to such an extent. So you have a huge period of Vijayanagar kings controlling Goa after the downfall of the Kadams. So that is the time when these things might have happened. So that is how the dating is done, and that is called a stylistic analysis or a stylistic dating. So this is a challenge. Like, for example, a researcher like me who is part of this West Coast, I will not be able to date something which is a part of Central India, because I don't have the knowledge of the region, the art of that region. But I will definitely be able to date something which is part of the West Coast.
This is really interesting, and I think when we talk about history and you talk about dates and you talk about a period where there is no records, actually, inferring something like this is really, really interesting. Yeah. It's it clearly shows that to bring out a book like this, it must have not just been passing through all the remote regions of Goa itself, but you would have to reference it
Yes,
with all these regions which at one point had
connections
a
with Goa.
connection, a stake, maybe as rulers of what we call the political Goa of
Correct,
today.
correct.
The boundaries are not what they were a few
Yes, yes,
hundred years
yes.
ago, and that is why your research must have taken you into those.
I would like to interrupt you here, and
Yeah.
I would like to add something. It was just not whenever there is an art which is promoted by the rulers. Okay, so that's called classical art,
Mm-hmm.
because those that art has specifications. Like you
Yeah.
have a classical dance and a folk dance.
Yes.
You'll be surprised to know, Preeta, that we in Goa had guilds, which were experts in this carving, and they cast
Yeah.
sculptures out of metal, and they were folk deities,
Oh.
sculptures of folk deities.
Okay.
So you have satir, which is very native to this west coast.
Yes.
Okay, that was imagined, and a bronze was carved out of it. Betal, which is male deity, the protector deity, you find his sculpture of bronze. You find Kelbai, okay, which is called as Gajalakshmi, which was represented as Gajalakshmi later on. Her sculpture is found in bronze.
Oh.
So we need to understand that the crux or the bottom line of what I'm trying to pass on through the book is that there was a strong guild which was existing. They were prominent, they were dominant, and they had made themselves as a part of Goa's culture, the local culture.
Yeah.
They might have adopted strategies, styles, references from as the rulers
Yeah.
changed or whatever. But they were having sound mind in terms of casting. That is one thing, sound knowledge there, and they had sound knowledge in terms of iconography. So they knew exactly what Betar was. They knew exactly what is how Satir has to be represented. Can you believe that Satir is an aniconic form, and which is always what do you say, which always attracts snakes towards it. So satir and snakes have been an integral part of the eco cultural paradigm, I would say. This, so when a sculpture of satir has to be made, that artisan has put his whole soul, mind into it, and he has made a female deity holding two snakes in her hand.
Okay.
So you can imagine the thought process which has gone into it.
Yes.
I can share you another thing is they have shown draperies, the pleats, the folds. If it is a sari, then the pleats have been shown. There's a very interesting sculpture of this deity which is called as Devaki Krishna. Again, it is very unique to Goa, and it is one of my favorite sculptures. So she's shown with this. Yeah, it is there on the front
on the
page.
cover.
Yeah, cover.
Very interesting.
So she's shown holding the baby Krishna, and just like how a mother would hold Krishna, it is a very natural way.
Yes.
She's holding her on her waist, like that, a very natural kind of a pose it is, and she's shown wearing a very beautiful style of headgear, which is called Dhammila style. And that we always imagine, sometimes when we see hairstyles, we always imagine how the hair must have been pinned. They've shown that pin behind.
Oh.
So much of details have gone into the casting and carving. So the hair bun which is there, the hairdo, okay, it is just not the hairdo, but they have shown how that hairdo has been kept on the head,
pinned onto the
head.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful aspect of
So
art.
you can, so what we are actually discovering through your book is this thriving art form, but not just an art form, but an art form of a very high caliber.
Yes.
That existed a few hundred years ago. So yeah, such a revelation for for a general for the general population of Goa to know that this quality of work was coming out of our own artisans. Okay, so now the next thing that I would like to ask you is, I'm sure this took you to, many different places. It took you to people, I mean, to situations where you would have to interpret different languages,
Yeah.
which could have either been, say, the old, like Kannada, since
Yes.
we had the Kadams ruling here, or maybe Portuguese at a later period, because that is when documentation became really
Yes.
strong and into place, as we would say. So I'm sure you had a lot of people, like scholars, who have also assisted in this book.
Basically, this book is, of course, I'm saying it is a part of my research. But you know what? Without helping hands, you can't come up with
Yes, yes.
the most part of the book. The reason is, you have to put a kind of strike a balance. Like when you are sourcing out material references, I had to refer to Sanskrit text like
That's right.
Manasullas,
Yes.
like there are references in Rajatarangini of casting. Then there is some Rangan, Sutradhar. Then there are so many Shilparatna. They're all in Sanskrit, and they speak details about casting, how to cast. Because you know what, I will also want to add when I after referring to those texts, I had a question in my mind: why so much of specifications? For me it is, for you also, for anybody at that time period point of time, I thought it is just melting metal and putting them into molds, but it is not so. In the olden traditions, they followed a method called as lost wax method.
Ah.
So lost wax is described as a madhuchishta vidhana, they call it in Sanskrit. So lost wax meaning they would make molds of wax. So before making the sculpture, there was an artisan who would make a mold of wax which would represent the sculpture.
Yeah.
So if he has to show the nose ring, he would make the nose ring out of wax.
Okay.
So it was a wax mold, wax sculpture
Yes.
that was put into the mold, and then the molten metal was poured. All this sounds very easy, but when I interacted with the present artisans who are working with casting, of course casting is very limited today in Goa. We have only restricted ourselves to lamps.
Lamps, yes.
So, and there are few here and there artifacts that are done, but I asked them, I said, do you follow lost wax method? Says no. So I said, why? Because he said that creates a lot of explosions.
Okay.
There are misfires.
Oh.
And people can get burns, and they can die out of injuries. It was just not one person who told me. There are around 4 to 5 people who I interacted, because I wanted to photograph or document lost wax method. Unfortunately, it is wiped off, just because you need to be utmost careful. Check out your safety, because it is not easy, because when the wax melts and it comes in contact with the molten metal, it does can create problems. So that is why looking at those Sanskrit texts, then looking at translations out of it, then I had to also refer to a few Portuguese texts, because Portuguese have mentioned metal sculptures being worshipped in Goa. So I wanted to show the continuity. We find pre-Portuguese casting in the form of these sculptures. They are all pre-Portuguese period. And then you have what happened to them in during the 17th, 16th century. So that to establish that continuity, I had to refer to Portuguese. So Sanskrit and Portuguese, they are not alien to me. I do understand, but I had to take help of expertise.
Yes.
There are two scholars who came to my rescue.
Yes, I'm sure, because this has to be a team effort for all this, so much of. So now let's get on to something else that I would like you to comment on as a researcher, because I'm sure no researcher is really satisfied that no, this is done and I've said everything I want to say about bronzes. I'm sure there's so much still within you. So how do you think you would like to take on, or maybe at some point say, okay, some younger researcher will take it on, but what do you think is the next step for this publication? I'm
See,
sure it doesn't end here.
no,
So
no,
there is
definitely.
something,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
is
yeah,
something
yeah.
within you still which has to come in, say a sequel as we call in literature, but something like a
Yeah,
next
yeah. No,
edition.
no,
Yes.
this is definitely not the end.
Yes.
One thing we need to understand that when you do a research on culture,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't end
Mm.
because Indian culture does not have a start and end.
And end, yeah.
Because it is a continuous process. So what I have missed on here, I always say that I would have, loved to extend this book. There could be voids and gaps. These are just 34 of them, masterpieces, which came to my mind. Secondly, when I went on documenting, I realized that there should be two parts for it. One is the community level worship, which is a part of this book.
Okay.
So I haven't gone to the private worship,
Oh.
which are still existing in the homes of many ancestral families in Goa.
Oh.
So I would like to name a
Yes.
few. You have the Mamai Kamath
Yes.
family, you have the Shankpalkar's
Yes.
family in Panji.
Yes.
If you go to the Ponda Taluka, you have the Kundaikar family. Here you have the Dempo family. So these families have worship spaces, and they must be having beautiful icons, which they have carried over the years with them as family traditions.
That's right.
These are just few families I have mentioned. There
Yes.
can be more.
There'll be
The other day I went to a village in down south, and the person who took me to this house said, "This is my ancestral house. Would you like to see it?" I said, "Of course." I went inside. It was like a museum for me. He had a devaro, a worship place, a shrine, the personal shrine. It was of course locked, but there were 12 important bronze sculptures in that.
Wow.
Which are really unique. So what I have tried to decide, what I have decided is, this is a book which speaks only of the community level worship. I want to document the sculptures which are a part of the family worship, which are part of the private worships. Now, to that, I require people to call out to me, or maybe when I go there, of course they are very hospitable, and they for this book I have received a lot of cooperation from the community and the society. I require hands which are young minds. I require researchers. I require people who are enthusiasts, so that we can come and kind of make a document of what we have lost.
Yes.
And basically another thing is, after this whole thing is done, okay, uh, can we kind of bring it back to the soil? Because what we have lost is lost. We can't cry over it. We only can only document it. But can we use this as a document to study the past and bring that method back? Why can't we have artisans like those who are still working with the Chola style bronzes in Swami Malay presently? Can we have Goan artisans? So can we have Goan guilds? Because it is not dead in Goa. The lamps are still being cast. So can these guilds be cast, casting metal sculptures again? So can we make an identity for us again? Carve out a niche. Like, no, Goa was equally in the forefront of all the cultural art. So that would be, I don't know whether it's a dream come true or what it is, but I really aspire for that.
But with that, you've answered my next question. So now what do I answer? So yes, I mean, I would have definitely liked to ask you, the next question would be that I'm sure with just bringing out what we had and what we still possess a part of, doesn't really, satisfy the soul of somebody like you, who will, who is, who's so deep into our, having studied our cultural practices, and you find that these objects have actually reflected communities over centuries, over centuries. So that's exactly what I would have asked you now, is that through this book, what would be your wish for this kind of an art form?
When I would like to also add to what you have asked me is, I'll just divert from the topic, because I want to bring out the importance of this. These people were so experts, when they would cast these sculptures. If it is a classical, then they have used a classical style. If it is a folk, the folk deity, they have shown even the jewelry. In Goa, you have a tradition of wearing bangles, gold bangles. And I did not know about it till I asked my wife at home. So she said, no, you can't wear them anyway. And there's a sequence,
There's a
there's
sequence.
Todo, Patli,
Yeah.
goat, and not goat. I happened to show my wife. There's a Mahishasura Mardani sculpture made out of worshipped as Bhagwati in Marseille. She's called a Bhagwati Chimulkarini. So I showed my wife that she this is her hand depicts bangles. So I happened to, because she was the only other person whom I could talk about it. So I showed my wife, I said, can you tell me what is this? So she said, Arey, this is the way we wear. And a sculpture can be assigned to around 16th century. So these artisans were just not making deities, they were just not making objects of worship. But as I've told you before, they were having a sound mind. So they were like all rounders. So that means if they were at that period of time, so they knew they what do you say, they have done their homework well. Okay, and then they would go into it. Can we bring that back? Okay, what would be required to be what would be the requirements to get it back in the soil of Goa? I have no answers to it now, but I would definitely appeal to the authorities, and I feel the present government is also very positive about reviving art. Whether we can get it back, but it is going to take time. It will not happen tomorrow.
Yes.
Or day after tomorrow.
And I think the looking at it, as you said, to bring it, we need to create that infrastructure, and which is best when it comes from the government.
Correct.
Rohit, I was going through this book, and I was quite pleasantly surprised to find some pages where you talk about the icons, of our cultural practice, the icons being made in various different media over, the years and the centuries. So, and I see you've listed them as clay, and you have wood, and you also have the kavi art on the walls of temples and many other structures. So I was in fact quite intrigued. I said, what is the relevance and the significance of writing about those icons in a book that is dedicated to the bronzes and the metal work?
The reason behind I have to cite these things is, first and foremost, when we have when you have a guild, okay, we understand that there was a casting guild. So when you have a guild, okay, yes, these are the ones.
These are the ones.
Yes.
See, you have various different medium.
True.
Like you had the kavi, you have the walls that are, and then you have a lot of these paintings on the walls. And then you this very interesting thing that you call the mange thapane. So
the
that's
crocodile worship.
The crocodile worship in clay.
Yes.
Okay, and then you also have these dough icons.
Yes.
So so I was actually quite intrigued, and I really want to know what makes you refer to these in a book of bronzes.
So when you have guilds, we understand that there was a guild, a full-fledged guild working here. What happens is, you cannot do a standalone study. You cannot remove something from the culture and no, I'm only going to study this, only bronzes. Okay, bronze is fine, but we have to understand that these artisans were connected to the society.
Yes.
Okay, that is one thing. Secondly, it was just not bronze, standalone bronze. Why these bronzes were made? They were made for community worship. They were connected to the temples. Okay, and were they made in lieu of some expectation? No, a big no. Why? Then we have to go and study the temple and the social structure of the of that particular village or of that particular time, that is Goa. And then how the structure managed. Okay, so we need to understand something, that there was something called as Gaonkari, which was a kind of a local administrative system managed by the indigenous people. I mean the local people from there. They were called Gaonkars. Okay, the villagers, you would say. Translation is villagers, stakeholders.
Yes.
And now these Gaonkars or the Gaonkari system manage the village administration, revenue. They built bunds, they developed agricultural lands, and under whom it was under the Gram Dev. So you have to understand something. For the Hindus, the Gram Dev or the Dev is a reality. Okay, it is just not a sculpture or a murti. but it has life. So the Gramdev is the theoretical owner of the land, of the people, of the fisheries, of the khazans, of the salt pans. Okay, when it comes to here, there are salt pans which belong to the god. So he's the theoretical owner, and that is how these fields were named. Bhagwatichi Nomshi, बेताळाचे खाजन, रवळनाथाचो कुणगो. So all these were connected to the Gramdev, and then the Gramdev, under the name of that Dev, the Lord, the God, these were distributed to the Gaonkars. I mean the villagers. And how? Supposing I am a carpenter, the temple of the Gramdev has to be maintained. So the carpenters would maintain the temple, and the Gaonkars, in lieu of that, the Gramdev would then lease out land to them. And that was called seva. That was seva in the sense it was done out of no expectation. Because that land is there or given to me, I am supposed to repair the temple. No, you are doing it out of devotion. And they are still today in the local parlance. If you go to the village, they are called as sevekari. Right from the pujari who performs the puja to the drummer to the musician, all these come under sevekari. There is no owner. The owner is the Gram Dev or the god, the village god, the village deity, you would say. So he's a theoretical owner. So that is how these people were bound by the temple. Okay. Unfortunately, when the Portuguese came, they didn't understand this layout. They understood that the administration is going on here. How? They did not understand, because they failed to understand the importance of the village deity, the Gram Dev. And that is how they converted this Gaonkari and codified it as Comunidad and disconnected the connection between the Gaonkari and the Gram Dev. They made it independent. That collapsed the whole system. Okay, the sevekaris were called servidors. Servidors are servants. Where servants and sevekari are completely two different things. Now, all these people were made part of a worship, and that worship was through various mediums. And what made me go into that also is when you read letters which were written by the Portuguese, there were order. Initially, the Portuguese were not ready to accept that there's a culture called of Goa or India here. Okay, so they found it very disturbing. So what they did is they came out with orders and decrees where people were not allowed or banned to worship any non-Christian gods or non-Catholic gods. So now these orders specifically mention that you cannot worship metal, dough, wood, and any other or stone deities in Goa. So metal I could understand because metal sculptures were there. I could understand stone because we still have stone worships happening. I mean worship of stone sculptures happening. I could not understand dough and clay. At individual level, we have clay worships happening, meaning Ganpati is still made out of clay and it is worshipped at individual level. But community level wise, where do we have these worships? So we still have traces of them. There is a very interesting ritual which is called Baras, which happens in the Naveli village of Bicholi Taluka, and where they make icons out of dough, like bullocks and turtles and all that, and they worship them. Clay icons at community level I found in 2-3 places, which is called Manya Thapadi. They make a huge crocodile out of clay, and that is to kind of worship the crocodile and request it not to destroy their fields. So that means we had a culture, a tradition of worshipping nature, and it was in various mediums. So people would paint, and then you find I could categorize them into two different aspects. One was two-dimensional, the other one was single-dimensional. And you'd be interested to hear this also, that I've mentioned it in my book, that there were icons which were made or represented on cloth. And there are 4 villages in Goa where these icons are found. They are called taka or cloth banners. And in 2 villages the worship is still on, meaning it still continues. The other villages it has stopped. So there was a taka which was worship, a cloth banner worship in Netravali village of Sange Taluka. Unfortunately, it is not there today. It doesn't exist anymore. So you can say that the village community used all sorts of these mediums, to explain to the people that nature is important. And that is how I to cite those things.
Okay, that's lovely. So that also gives us another dimension in understanding the folk and the traditional practices of Goa. So we, on a very positive note, we will end our podcast today saying that, when this is just the beginning, and I'm sure our our system will take cognizance of this and take it a step further.
I'm
Not
very
just one
positive.
step, maybe many, many steps further. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.